Before the summer of 1988, the Carr family lived a peaceful and happy life in the small Florida town of Alturas. They were known for their strong faith and close family bond, the kind of people everyone in town respected. But everything changed on one June morning when 16-year-old Dwayne Carr found a strange letter in the family's mailbox. The message was short and terrifying. It warned the Carrs to leave Florida or face deadly consequences. Dwayne immediately ran to show his parents. His mother, Peggy, was frightened, but his father, Pereelin, brushed it off as a cruel prank. For a while, life went on as normal. But by October, an uneasiness had settled over the family. Then, on the 23rd, tragedy struck. Peggy suddenly became violently ill. She suffered from intense nausea and pain that wouldn't go away. Before long, her once thick hair began to fall out in clumps. Despite how bad things were, Pereelin thought it was just the flu and refused to take her to the hospital right away. But Peggy's condition only got worse. Within a week, she slipped into a coma. Then, in a horrifying twist, Dwayne started showing the same symptoms: severe pain, weakness, and hair loss. At that point, police and medical experts got involved. On December 2nd, their investigation led to a shocking discovery. Tests showed that the family had been poisoned with thallium, a toxic chemical once used in rat poison but banned in the U.S. years earlier. Every member of the Carr family had dangerous levels of it in their bodies. It became clear this wasn't a random illness. Someone was deliberately trying to kill them. That threatening letter hadn't been a prank at all. It was a warning of what was to come. Authorities raced to find the person responsible before anyone else could be harmed. What started as a peaceful family story had turned into a chilling mystery, one that would haunt the small town of Alturas for years to come. The very next day, October 31st, Peggy slipped into a coma. Her stepson Travis was placed on a respirator, and Dwayne's condition wasn't improving either. That's when police realized they were dealing with something far more serious than an ordinary illness. Investigators launched an urgent search for the source of the poisoning. They tested the family's home, the nearby orange groves, the local water supply, and even the diner where Peggy worked. But no trace of thallium was found anywhere. As news spread, fear rippled through the quiet town of Alturas. People wanted answers, and fast. Detectives returned to the Carr home, collecting dust samples and gathering hundreds of items to send to the lab. Then, one discovery changed everything. A six-pack of Coca-Cola bottles sitting in the kitchen. 3 were unopened. When tested, each bottle contained a deadly amount of thallium, enough to kill an adult. Investigators considered 2 possibilities. Either the bottles had been tampered with at the factory, or someone had deliberately poisoned them. At the Carr home, if it was a factory issue, countless people across Florida, maybe even across the country, could be in danger. Coca-Cola quickly cooperated with authorities, and after a thorough investigation, large-scale tampering was ruled out. The company's bottling process made it impossible for poison to have been added during production. That left only one conclusion: someone had intentionally targeted the Carr family. The investigation then turned inward. Detectives began to look closely at the people inside the home, starting with Peggy's husband, Pereelin Carr. Although they had been married for only 7 months, the relationship was far from perfect. Pereelin worked long hours at a phosphate mine, and Peggy had begun to suspect he was being unfaithful. Her fears were confirmed one night when she caught him with another woman. Adding to police suspicion, Pereelin was out of town the weekend Peggy first became sick, and when he returned, he refused to take her to the hospital. Investigators dug deeper into his background, searching for any motive that could explain why he might have wanted to harm his wife. But one detail didn't fit. If Pereelin was guilty, why would he poison his own son, Travis? During questioning, Pereelin mentioned something the police hadn't known. For months before Peggy fell ill, Dwayne had found an anonymous letter in the mailbox. It contained a chilling warning. The family had 2 weeks to leave Florida, or they would die. At the time, everyone brushed it off as a prank. But now, that letter seemed like a serious threat. Investigators then uncovered another disturbing clue. A few years earlier, 2 of the Carr's dogs had died unexpectedly, both suffering symptoms eerily similar to what Peggy later experienced. This led police to suspect the poisoner might have been experimenting before targeting the family. When doctors ran more tests, they confirmed everyone in the Carr household even Perelin himself, had thallium in their system. The discovery cleared him as a suspect. It didn't make sense that someone would deliberately poison themselves. Even Peggy's young granddaughter, Casey, had been exposed. After months of suffering and hospital visits, tragedy struck. On March 3, 1989, Peggy Carr passed away, leaving behind a devastated family and a community desperate for justice. When doctors realized Peggy's condition could not improve, her family faced an unbearable decision: whether to keep her on life support or let her go. Dwayne was called to her bedside one last time to say goodbye. Peggy Carr passed away at just 41 years old, leaving her family heartbroken and a community in shock. With her death, the case shifted from an investigation into poisoning to a full homicide inquiry. Detectives knew they were dealing with someone methodical and intelligent. Poisoning isn't a random act. It's planned, deliberate, and cruel. FBI analysts studied the contaminated Coke bottles and made a chilling discovery: faint scratch marks around the caps. Someone had carefully removed and resealed them after adding the poison. The thallium mixture had been expertly prepared. It dissolved cleanly without changing the drink's appearance, color, or taste. That level of precision pointed to someone with chemical expertise. Police began questioning every neighbor and local resident. Alturas was a small town, so it didn't take long to talk to everyone. Among those questioned were the Carrs' closest neighbors, George and Diana Tropow. When detectives approached George, his reaction immediately raised eyebrows. He launched into a bitter rant about the Carr family, calling them names and complaining about their noise and behavior. But what really caught investigators' attention was what he said next. When asked why anyone would want to harm the Carrs, George replied, "Someone probably just wanted them to move away." That statement matched the wording in the threatening letter the family had received months earlier, a detail only the police knew. Digging into George Trapel's background revealed even more troubling facts. He was a self-taught chemist, while his wife Diana held a master's degree in chemistry. Both were members of a high IQ society for people with exceptionally advanced intellects. And years earlier, George had served time in prison for his role as a chemist in a drug manufacturing operation, one that used thallium as part of the process. The evidence began to line up. He had the motive, the knowledge, and the opportunity. Investigators also discovered that George had recently clashed with the Carr family over loud music. Just 2 days after that argument, Peggy became sick. Still, the police had no direct proof linking him to the crime. They couldn't arrest him based on suspicion alone. George Tropow was reserved, intelligent, and cautious, the kind of person who would never confess under normal questioning. The FBI decided to try a different approach. They would send in an undercover agent to earn his trust and gather evidence from the inside. Special Agent Susan Gorek was chosen for the job. Her mission was to infiltrate a local social group that George belonged to and observe him closely. She created a fake identity, Sherry Gwynn, a woman pretending to be separated from an abusive husband, and began preparing for her undercover role. On April 14, 1989, Susan attended a weekend murder mystery event hosted by George and Diana Tropow at a local hotel. The couple often organized these events for their circle of friends. When Susan arrived, she was greeted at the door by George himself. For a tense moment, she worried he might recognize her from surveillance operations, but he didn't seem to suspect anything. She stayed calm, playing her part carefully. Susan quickly noticed that George was quiet, analytical, and detached, not someone who confronted others openly. Instead, he preferred control, using intellect and subtlety to dominate a situation. That observation made her mission even more nerve-wracking. When she checked in under her alias, she received a packet of materials for the weekend. It included a pamphlet George had personally written, describing various fictional murder scenarios for the mystery game. One of them involved poisoning, a chilling coincidence given the real case. Even more unsettling, one paragraph in the pamphlet advised that when someone receives a death threat at home, the wise thing to do is throw away all your food and be cautious about what you eat. It was an eerie echo of the Carr family's real-life tragedy. The statement in George Trapel's murder mystery pamphlet about throwing out your food after a death threat was almost identical to the message the Carr family had received before. Peggy was poisoned. That chilling coincidence convinced Agent Susan Gorek, she was dealing with the right man. Throughout the weekend, Susan stayed close to George, striking up conversations and carefully studying his words and behavior. She knew that one wrong move could expose her true identity and put her in danger. When George asked about her background, Susan, still pretending to be Sherry Gwynn, spoke about her fictional husband, a lawyer from Houston, and how she'd left him to start a new life. George responded by boasting that he could always tell when someone was lying, claiming he watched for small movements in a person's neck muscles. His eerie confidence only made Susan more uneasy. Before the weekend ended, she casually mentioned that she was thinking about moving to Florida for a fresh start. That single comment proved crucial. George revealed that he and his wife were also planning to move and might sell their home soon. After consulting with her superiors, Susan was told to continue her undercover operation. If she could gain more of George's trust, she might find enough evidence to justify a full search of his property. A week later, George invited Sherry to visit his house. During the tour, he proudly spoke about how safe Alturas was, how people didn't even bother locking their doors. As she looked around, Susan noticed several odd details: a hidden passage behind a bookshelf, shelves of chemicals and glassware, and even a mannequin dressed in strange clothing. But none of it, on its own, was enough to justify a warrant. Despite the disappointment, Susan kept her cover intact. She knew one slip could destroy months of work. George was a brilliant but unpredictable man, and if he ever suspected she was an undercover agent, she feared what he might do. Over the next several months, Susan continued to meet George for lunch under close FBI surveillance. She never touched food or drinks left unattended, always aware of the possibility of being poisoned. During these meetings, George revealed more about himself, his sharp intelligence, his bitterness toward others, and his belief that most people weren't as smart as he was. After 8 long months, Susan had gathered fragments of information, but not enough to prove George's guilt. Her bosses began to question whether the mission was worth continuing, but Susan refused to give up. She wanted justice for Peggy Carr and her family, and she couldn't shake the thought that what happened to them could happen to anyone. Finally, in December 1989, a major breakthrough arrived. George and his wife Diana moved out of town and offered Sherry Gwynn the chance to rent their house. It was the opportunity Susan had been waiting for. With their permission, she could legally enter the property and invite the county crime scene team to inspect it. No warrant required. Investigators searched every inch, focusing on places where chemical traces might linger: air vents, drains, and filters. The garage contained shelves lined with bottles and chemical containers, potential evidence linking George to the poison. Samples were sent to the FBI lab for analysis, but weeks passed with no word. Susan continued her undercover role, struggling to keep the operation alive while waiting for the results. By January 1990, frustration was mounting. Determined to provoke a reaction, Susan came up with a risky plan. She would trick George into revealing something incriminating. What she didn't realize was that George might be setting a trap of his own. They agreed to meet at a quiet picnic area behind a McDonald's in Sebring, the town where he had recently relocated. The meeting was secretly recorded. During their conversation, Susan handed George a business card, claiming it had been left by detectives who were still looking for him. The moment he saw it, his expression changed. His calm, analytical demeanor gave way to visible tension, and for the first time, the man who had always acted in control seemed caught off guard. The letter Susan received was eerily similar to the one the Carr family had found before. Peggy was poisoned. That chilling coincidence convinced her she was on the right trail. All weekend long, Susan, working undercover, carefully kept her composure around George Tropow. Every conversation was a balancing act. One wrong word could expose her and cost her life. When Tropow asked about her background, Susan stuck to her cover story. She told him she had left her husband, a lawyer from Houston, and was starting over. Tropow listened intently, and then shared something unsettling. He said he could tell when someone was lying, just by watching how their neck muscles moved. The comment made Susan's pulse quicken, but she stayed calm. By the end of the weekend, she told him she planned to move to Florida to escape her troubled past. That small lie opened a new door. Tropow revealed that he and his wife were also considering selling their home and moving her practice. After updating her team, Susan was told to keep the undercover operation going longer than planned. This was her chance to find the hard evidence they needed, something that could tie Tropal directly to the poisoning. A week later, Susan visited his home. Tropal proudly told her how safe the neighborhood was, saying no one even locked their doors. But as she walked through the rooms, she noticed odd things: a secret passage behind the library shelves, and even a mannequin dressed in strange gear. Nothing she saw was enough for a search warrant, but her gut told her she was close. She continued the operation, fully aware that discovery could mean death. Tropal was highly intelligent, and if he ever suspected who she really was, he might strike again, this time at her. Over the next several months, Susan met him for lunch several times. Every meeting was watched by law enforcement from a distance. She never ate or drank anything left unattended. She knew what Tropal was capable of. Through these interactions, he slowly revealed his arrogance. He often spoke about how much he despised people he considered stupid, giving her a disturbing glimpse into his mindset. After 8 long months, Susan had bits and pieces of evidence, but not enough to convict him. Her supervisors were losing patience and considered calling it off. But for Susan, this was personal. She couldn't stop, not when Peggy Carr and her family still needed justice. Then came a break. In December 1989, George and his wife, Diana, decided to move. They offered Susan, still posing as Sherry Gwynn, the chance to rent their old home. That opportunity changed everything. Because she had their consent to enter, she no longer needed a search warrant. She immediately called in the county crime scene unit to help search the property. Investigators collected vials, bottles, and chemical containers from the garage. They were careful, knowing any trace of thallium could prove the case. Samples were sent to the FBI lab for testing. While waiting for results, Susan continued to meet with Tropal. She was running out of new stories to tell, but she knew she had to keep him talking. By January 1990, still with no word from the lab, Susan decided to push harder. She arranged to meet Tropal at a small picnic area behind a McDonald's in Sebring, the town where he had moved. Their conversation was secretly recorded. During the meeting, Susan handed him a fake business card, pretending it had been left by detectives looking for him. The reaction was instant. Tropal became visibly nervous, struggling to maintain his composure. He kept inviting her to visit his new house. Invitations she wisely refused. The tension in the air was heavy, and Susan couldn't shake that if she ever went there, she might not return. Not long after, the call she had been waiting for finally came. The FBI confirmed that one of the vials from Tropal's garage contained thallium nitrate, the same compound used in the Carr family poisoning. It was the final piece of the puzzle. On April 5, 1990, police arrested George Tropal at his home in Sebring. The long, dangerous investigation was finally over when Susan revealed her true identity and served him with a warrant for handwriting samples. Tropal didn't react with anger or surprise. He simply smiled and said, "Oh, okay." That chilling calm only made him more disturbing. But the most shocking discovery came during a later search of his Sebring home. Behind a pegboard wall, investigators found a secret room with no interior handle and a soundproof window. Inside was a platform bed fitted with wooden stirrups and a pulley system, a setup that seemed designed for torture. It was horrifying to imagine what could have happened if Susan had ever accepted his invitation to visit. In January 1991, George Tropal went to trial. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: a handwritten poisoning guide, journal describing thallium as the ideal killer's weapon, fingerprints linking him to it, and tools that perfectly matched the tampered Coke bottles used to poison the Carr family. Throughout the trial, Tropal stayed eerily calm, even smiling at times. His arrogance and lack of remorse painted a chilling picture of a man who believed he was too intelligent to be caught. After 2 months of testimony, the jury took only 4 hours to reach a verdict. On March 6, 1991, George Tropal was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. The judge's words were final. The defendant, George James Tropal, shall be electrocuted until he is dead. Justice had finally been served for Peggy Carr and her family. Special Agent Susan's bravery and persistence turned a deadly mystery into a solved case. She risked her life to uncover the truth, and in doing so, prevented a brilliant but remorseless man from ever hurting anyone again. Though Peggy's family eventually recovered from the poisoning, the loss left lasting scars. Her teenage son, Dwayne, especially, struggled with the grief of losing his mother so young. Even years later, the pain lingered, a quiet reminder of the evil that had once invaded their home. In time, Dwayne found his own way to heal. He began writing letters to his mother, a way to speak to her, even though she was gone. In one of those letters, his words were filled with both love and regret. "Dear Mom, this is your baby boy. I just want to tell you that I love you, and I'm sorry for all the bad things I ever did. I hope you're in a better place now. I think about you every day and wish you were still here. I haven't always done right, but I'm trying to get my life together. I promise I'll make you proud." And Dwayne kept that promise. Over the years, he rebuilt his life. He got married, started a family, and worked hard to become the kind of father he always wished he'd had more time with. Every day, he honors his mother's memory, not through words, but through the way he lives his life. Dwayne Dauberly's story is a reminder that even after unbearable tragedy, healing is possible. His journey stands as a quiet testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love.